Trump campaign is now reaching voters online.
You are seeing the President of the United States. Look at the lines.
You join our movement.
A lot of President Trump supporters here.
Greatest movement in the history of our country.
President Trump stood up early on and said, let's stop the travel, save a lot of American lives.
Coronavirus outbreak has only further exposed Joe Biden's weak leadership towards a communist nation.
Because of the system we have, we've been able to ramp up and fight this virus, but that would not be there if Joe Biden were president, because he'd create Medicare for all and destroy the research and innovation that we needed in this time, in this place.
How refreshing to have a president who said, this is what I said I was going to do, so I'm going to do it.
We need to fight back. We will fight back.
We have an opportunity to fight for our freedom.
And I can tell you the president was focused, laser focused on pressing back on China.
We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. We will make America great again.
Welcome to Team Trump Online.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black, and you ain't black, and you ain't black, and you ain't black. But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black. Take a look at my record, man.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I marched with tens of thousands of others.
He had not actually marched during the civil rights movement and kept telling the story anyway.
I came out of the civil rights movement. I was one of those guys that sat in and marched and all that stuff.
Now, his aides went back to say, look, he was in office marching for the idea.
That's not what the word marching means on Twitter.
I was not out marching.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
They're going to put you all back in chains.
And you ain't black.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
You ain't black. You ain't black. You ain't black. You ain't black.
The most racist thing a person could tell me is that I'm supposed to choose something based on my race.
You ain't black.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black Voices for Trump Real Talk, exclusively on Team Trump Online. I'm Katrina Pierson, and tonight we are joined by Black Voices for Trump 2020 Advisory Board members T.W. Shannon, former Oklahoma Speaker of the House and current CEO of Chickasaw Community Bank, and Ken Blackwell, former Mayor of Cincinnati and former United States Ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Gentlemen, welcome to tonight's program. We have a lot to cover tonight, from President Trump's plan to safely and responsibly reopen the economy to Joe Biden's disastrous and unvetted record of failure. The media won't vet him, so we will. Let's dive right in. Tonight, we'll begin by recapping Joe Biden's latest dehumanizing comments about black voters yesterday on The Breakfast Club. Listen to this.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
So you see, Joe Biden's record has never been vetted. It's quite a perk to being a white liberal in America, coddled by the mainstream media conglomerates, owned by white liberals. It's a powerful position to be in. Hollywood, also controlled by white liberals, will adore you. They'll even place you on a pop culture pedestal, as long as you do as they say, not as they do. Because power is the ultimate currency. The power to control, manipulate, and punish the masses, all to accumulate more power. But people like Joe Biden just followed the standard blueprint to climb the ladder in society, cozying up to the people who can move them along the ranks, do their bidding just long enough to earn, and then personally benefit financially. They protect each other, while the average American suffers and our nation is sold off to the highest bidder. The media wants you to believe that Joe Biden is just a jovial guy. Black liberals want you to believe that Joe Biden has always been a friend to African Americans, at least the clean and articulate ones. He even gets a pass for sexual assault allegations by one of his own former staffers. But the truth is, Joe Biden probably is just a jovial guy. When never having worked a real job a day in your life, becoming a multimillionaire while in public office, and his relatives, Joe Biden has never been a friend to African Americans, and you heard that from Kamala Harris. Her comments were not about busing policy. This was about Joe Biden spending his entire career cozying up to the most vile and publicly anti-Black racists to advance his personal career. And this was during one of the most racially sensitive times in our country, a time of darkness for many Black Americans. And it worked. Joe Biden was first elected to the United States Senate in 1972, before I was even born. He was leading the fight early in his career about busing students across school districts so that Black children could benefit from an integrated education. However, in order to prevent their kids from being in the same schools with our kids, Joe Biden sought and obtained the support of Herman Talmadge and James Eastland, racist Southern Democrats who opposed desegregation. He agreed with these men and said so during a speech, quote, "In order to even the score, we must now give the Black man a head start or even hold the white man back. I don't buy that." Delaware, 1975. But don't take my words for it. Here's Joe Biden himself.
Eastland, Stennis, Thurman, all these men became my friends. He said, "What would Jim Eastland do for you in Delaware?" And I was in a tough re-election. I said, Mr. Chairman, some places you'd help and some places you'd hurt. And he looked at me, all kidding aside, in the Senate dining room with Herman Talmadge sitting there and said, "Well, I'll come to Delaware and campaign for you again, you son, whichever will help you the most." I used to go over after every executive session of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee and go into Jim Eastland's office, which was catty corner, and sit down and allow me to ask him all the dumb questions a young kid would want to ask. Who was the most powerful man you ever met, Senator? What was the most significant thing that ever occurred since you've been here?
The Democratic frontrunner, Joe Biden, said something at a fundraiser last night that is, I'm going to call it insensitive. It's much worse than that. I don't know what to call it except stupid. He said, "I was in the caucus with James O. Eastland. He never called me boy. He always called me son." Mr. Biden then brought up a deceased Georgia senator, a guy like Herman Talmadge, one of the meanest guys I ever knew. You go down the list of all these guys. Well, guess what? At least there was some civility. We got things done. Those were two racist members of the United States Senate. Why?
I'm told by a couple advisors to the former vice president that he's been urged and asked and cautioned and warned to not use these segregationist senators as examples. It adds to the already sort of high burden he's trying to make to modernize himself, if you will, and then using the word boy.
Joe Biden has to be really careful about his memories. If he wants to bring this stuff up, it can cost him a lot.
We'll see if he wants to clean it up as he's dealing with some blowback and some deserved blowback, among it the New York City mayor, Bill de Blasio, one of the candidates for president. It's 2019, and Joe Biden is longing for the good old days of civility typified by James Eastland. Eastland thought my multiracial family should be illegal and that whites were entitled to, I'll let you read the rest of the tweet because I'm not going to say it on television, but it's violent acts against African Americans.
Eastland, Stennis, Thurman, all these men became my friends.
Talmadge was a senator well known as a staunch segregationist who ordered state schools to be closed rather than desegregated. Eastland was a senator who was an avowed white supremacist known as, quote, the voice of the white South, who came to symbolize white resistance to racial integration during the civil rights era and spoke of Black people as, quote, an inferior race. He was also known to refer to Black men as, quote, Boy, this was pointed out by Senator Cory Booker. Booker says Eastland used those words like that and the racist policies that accompanied them to perpetuate white supremacy and strip Black Americans of our very humanity, unquote. And instead of offering a simple apology requested by Booker, because Joe Biden praises and defends his racist BFFs, Joe Biden insisted that Booker himself should be the one to apologize because, quote, he knows better. Mayor Bill de Blasio added that it's past time for Biden's apologies. So I'll note, to this day, Joe Biden has not atoned for his involvement with these horrible racists and pivots by touting his fake involvement with the civil rights movement. In 1988, Joe Biden claimed that he had marched in the civil rights movement, but that has since been debunked by the New York Times. And we can't leave out the 1994 crime bill, which was responsible for incentivizing the building of for-profit prisons and the mass incarceration of Black men, also referred to as predators by white liberals. Now here we are in 2020, and one of Joe Biden's primary policy platforms is to place the families of illegal immigrants as a priority over Black families. He supports giving free health care to illegals, while you and I will be stuck paying premiums, whether you go see a doctor or not. So the question is why? Why would people like Jim Clyburn and Barack Obama choose Biden? Well, we've gone through the decades and we've only barely touched the surface on why Joe Biden is bad for Black America, but the answer is simple, because it's always the same: power. Barack Obama chose Joe Biden for his perceived foreign policy credentials because he didn't have any credentials of his own. But he must have learned a lot in those 8 years with Joe Biden, because he coaxed him out of his 2016 presidential desires, bypassed his own vice president to lend his support to his Secretary of State instead. Which, if you think about it, I guess Obama ain't Black now either. And even in 2020, Barack Obama refused to support Joe Biden, his own vice president, again, until he was the last man standing. Clearly, President Obama knows something perhaps the rest of us don't. And as for Clyburn, we're all too familiar with the devil's bargain on race issues to maintain power. Black liberals back the winning horse to maintain their scraps because you can't win an election or fundraise if problems are actually solved. I mean, how can a Democrat campaign without victims to exploit? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Democrats fear President Trump. He is delivering results. He is solving problems and keeping his promises to Black America by lifting up those underserved communities who have been pushed aside by liberal leadership for decades. And the Democrats' base of power has always been relegated to ghettos. So naturally, the demonization, destruction, and character assassination of those who desire to implement positive change for Black and brown communities is simply a business model, a model that has cost Black America greatly. But generational change has finally arrived. They could not defeat Donald J. Trump in 2016, and now Black America has experienced a leader who fights for them and will continue to put their families first and insist that opportunities to pursue the American dream can be achieved for anyone who strives to reach their full potential, be fully reserved for individuals who enter our country legally. We will no longer allow white liberals to mislead the public about who the real racists are. Joe Biden will be fully vetted. Stay woke, and we'll be right back.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't Black, and you ain't Black, and you ain't Black, and you ain't Black.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country.
Hey guys, Cecilia S. Johnson here, and I want to remind you that President Trump has spent the past 3 years fighting for you to make America great again.
Thanks to President Trump, criminal justice reform gave nonviolent offenders a second chance at life and the American dream.
His policies have created 9,000 opportunity zones that will impact 35 million people in struggling communities.
Criminal justice reform gave nonviolent offenders a second chance at life and the American dream.
He has given $100 million to HBCUs for scholarships and research.
He fights against illegal immigration, a plague that has salvaged the Black community.
And he has done all of this for us in less than one term. Imagine what he can achieve with 4 more years.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black, and you ain't black, and you ain't black.
And welcome back to Black Voices for Trump, Real Talk Online. Gentlemen, you just heard my take on this Jim Crow Joe Biden nonsense. And this clip ultimately went viral yesterday morning, not because the media reported on it, but because the Black Twitter sphere lit up across party lines, forcing this response from the Joe Biden campaign. Take a listen.
Let me just be really clear. In the tweet that I put out, I said that the vice president's comments at the end of that interview, which Ali Vitale definitely alluded to and noted the tone of the interview at the end, were said in jest. But I want to be clear about what he was saying. And what Vice President Biden was saying is he will put his record and his track record up with the African-American community and in the African-American community up against Donald Trump any single day, period. There is no comparison.
I shouldn't have been such a wise guy. I shouldn't have been so cavalier in responding to what I thought was, anyway, it was, I don't take it for granted at all. And no one should have to vote for any party based on their race, their religion, their background. There are African Americans who think that Trump is worth voting for. I don't think so. I'm prepared to put my record against his. That was the bottom line, and it was really unfortunate. I shouldn't have been so cavalier.
TW, what's your response to the Joe Biden campaign reaction?
Well, first of all, it is disingenuous to pretend as if Joe Biden has a history or a record even of supporting African-American issues. This is the same guy that once even referred to his running mate, Barack Obama, as being clean and articulate. I mean, it appalls me that somehow, this guy is able to get away with this. But what we know is there exists a real, not only liberal bias, not only is this the height of really, liberal, it's the height of let me start that over. Not only is this the height of really what I would call, liberal privilege, what you see here is a real double standard. What we also know is that the mainstream media is not going to hold Joe Biden accountable for what he said about African Americans. Not only is it offensive to me, it's offensive to my African American children, it's offensive to my entire family, and he should spend the rest of this campaign apologizing to our community because what he said was outrageous.
Yeah, Ken, what do you think about his campaign's response? Was that even acceptable?
I'm reminded of that old comedic line. Don't believe your lying eyes and ears. That's what they're telling Black folks. There's a discernible pattern of disrespect that Biden has exhibited over the years. And we know that respect discovers the dignity of others. And here was Joe Biden basically saying that those who think differently, those who think different than the plantation managers, those who think independently are automatically somehow marginalized. And that's disrespectful. And it won't be forgotten, no matter how much the campaign tries to cover it over.
And Ken, wouldn't you agree with this, Katrina? I mean, the real, ironic part of what Joe's comments were is the fact that he was just being honest. He's only displaying and revealing what liberals have always said and what they've always believed is, if you're black, you have to vote Democrat, which is just outrageous.
It is outrageous, TW. But in that vein, we keep hearing, similar things like his spokesperson just said from many black liberals that, Joe Biden has fought alongside the black community. He's been very involved. He'll put his record up against anybody. But Kamala Harris reminded him how hurtful it was when he spent his career siding with openly racist during his tenure. Remember when she called him out during the primary debate on his busing policy?
But look, this was just an unintended moment of transparency. And the only way that they can stop this sort of transparency from happening and the real Joe Biden being revealed is by keeping him in the cave.
Well, that seems to be working for him. TW, you mentioned that he wasn't, he was just being himself. And so, the first thing I thought when she came out and said, "Oh, this was just in jest," and I think guys, I think she's right, because I do think it was a joke. Joe Biden thinks that the black vote is a big joke, and he showed that with his disdain when Charlemagne had the audacity to tell him he needed to come back and answer more questions. I just think that people should really take a step back and look at that. I mean, TW, you saw the clip. What did you think initially when Joe Biden said, "You ain't black if you don't support me"?
I thought what courage it is for him to be honest about what liberals have thought and what we've known to be the truth for a really long time. Joe just finally said it. And my first reaction as a former campaign staffer, having worked for members of Congress myself, I thought, I know the cleanup is going to start. I know there's going to be a huge movement. I'm sure they're already working on who they're going to name, what African-American they're going to roll out as a vice presidential running mate. I'm sure that's part of the campaign strategy. But at the end of the day, conversation reveals character. And what we found out is that Joe Biden believes that because of the color of your skin, you have to vote a certain way, which to me flies in the face of everything it means, not only to be an African-American, but what it means to be American. And that, Katrina, is why we're seeing the president's numbers continue to rise and have almost doubled since taking office. It's because, President Trump has enacted policies that we know have moved the needle in our community in a positive direction.
Absolutely. Ken, do you agree? Do you think now that the cleanup is going to include, identifying more African Americans to get out there, and support Joe Biden?
That's going to be the attempt. But let me just say, I continue to say this was pure and simple an assault on the dignity of Black folks who think independently and who can see that there's a real contrast between the whole notion of Joe Biden and the left, and that is to expand the welfare state, and President Trump, who has in fact gone all in at building an opportunity society. That's the difference. There is a clash of worldviews, and I think that President Trump and our worldview will win this battle for thinking Black folks.
I think you might be right. I want to take a minute and show you another clip. I want you to watch this little pattern of Joe Biden's comments and get your reaction to those. Let's take a look.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
It's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful.
I would have to ask Black voters a question like, why do the old white men, who have the most racist legislation towards Black people, why are they, the top two front runners when it comes to Black support, Joe Biden and Bloomberg?
How do you feel about President Trump?
I'm very honored and grateful that he was, signed the First Step Act.
The same folks that voted for me voted for President Trump because President Trump made promises to the voters and he's keeping the promises. So without any question, if you look at his legacy, it will be his accomplishments in office, frankly, helping in many, many ways African Americans.
I heard President Trump's commitment to the folks that are returning home. I heard the promises that he made, and him being there and that graduation was evidence that the promises that he made was promises that he kept.
We love you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Now, if the best prediction of someone's future behavior is the pattern from their past behavior, I'm often reminded of President Reagan's quote that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. TW, what do you make of those comments that we see from Joe Biden and what that might mean for Black America?
Well, again, I think the contrast has become very, very clear and very plain between the candidate that the Democrat Party is espousing and our candidate, President Donald Trump. I mean, there's only one candidate in this race who has moved the needle, whether you're looking at job opportunity, you're looking at household income. Well, the proof is in the pudding, and we've moved the needle. But what we see is, when I hear those comments from Joe Biden, the first thing that comes to my mind is Uncle Joe. The 1950s called, and they want their policy back. I mean, this is 2020, and I can't believe that we have a candidate who thinks in his mind that he is able to define what it means to be Black. When I look at this screen and I look at people like Katrina Pierson and an ambassador here who have made amazing accomplishments both professionally and privately in the private sector. The idea that Joe thinks he can decide what it means to be Black in America, not only is it offensive, I mean, it hurts to think that we're still in that place in America. But the good news is he won't be our president of the United States.
That's right.
I mean, I think African Americans, I know, are smart enough to see this. This dates back to what we've seen all the time. And, on the Sunday before election, we're all used to candidates rolling in and promising us the moon in our churches. But now we've got a candidate and actually a president who has delivered on those promises.
Yeah, Ken. So knowing all of this now, and again, his record has never been vetted. And people are finally starting to see who Joe Biden really is. Why do you think it's more critical now more than ever to re-elect President Trump?
Because Joe Biden embraces a stale status quo. This president has been a disruptor of a status quo that has not been working. And so we see it in our communities all across the country, and we see it in Black communities and neighborhoods across the country. We see he is a president that is going on record as working for more effective schools. He's in fact got capital coming back into our cities and our neighborhoods. That has resulted in a lift in family income. It's resulted in jobs and the dignity of work, and it's actually, it's reflective of a commitment to making sure that we remain a free and prosperous nation and people. That's why I say it's crazy for the left and for the Democrat Party to believe that the Black community is going to embrace a stale, dysfunctional status quo when they can begin to see that this president has an agenda that has actually brought about meaningful change in their lives.
Meaningful change in record time. So let's talk about that for a second. The Black unemployment rate reached historical lows thanks to President Trump's economic policies. There were more Black Americans working more than ever before prior to this artificial interruption of the economy by the coronavirus pandemic. The president knows Americans want to get back to work, and we know that he can take us right back to those record highs in record time because he's done it before. And as of this week, all 50 states are in some phase of reopening their economies under the administration's backed guidelines. And Ken, you're a member of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity and recently tweeted a video about how President Trump will lead Americans in defeating the false prophets of gloom and doom like Joe Biden. Why are the Democrats so bad at creating opportunity and prosperity? And why is Joe Biden in particular such a hopeless and uninspiring candidate?
Because Biden and the Democrats have embraced a government-centric model that basically is dependent upon the redistribution of a slow-growing economy. President Trump understands that what we need is more capital infusion in our cities, in our country, and that's why he's led the way when he redirected about $3 trillion that were offshore by cutting red tape and by cutting taxes. He, in fact, got that capital coming back not only to our country, but to our neighborhoods through opportunity zones and other policies. So a clear choice. You know, this is a president that paints in bold colors, and he said it early on. You know, what do you have to lose? Give me a chance. Yeah. And this president has stood and stayed in there, not just during campaign season, but over the last 3.5, almost 4 years now. He's making a difference, and he will lead us on a snapback because he laid a great foundation. In January, we had the strongest economy in the world, and that's why bouncing back is going to be a V shape, not a U shape.
Yeah, TW, if you think about it, you know, could you imagine had we not had President Trump, who built this amazing buffer in our economy once this happened? I mean, it's frightening to think of where we would be right now if not for President Trump, you know, in this first term. And you're the CEO of a community bank, and you guys are one of the first to step up to successfully partner to help with the Paycheck Protection Program to help minority-owned businesses. And we know these funds have saved small businesses and mid-sized businesses that otherwise may not even exist today. So being on the front lines and supporting these rescue efforts, what has been your personal experience during this time? Because there's a lot of people who don't really understand the process, how it works. And in your opinion, how has it helped?
Well, Katrina, I'm absolutely convinced when the history books are written, we'll learn this moment in history and recognize really the great contribution that the leadership of Donald Trump and the administration made, and not just saving jobs for all of America, but particularly in Black America. You know, Ken mentioned, you know, the influence and the power of capital. And one of the things I know to my heart that we've always led on when I was in the legislature and even now at the bank where I'm CEO is capital is a coward. It will not flow to a hostile environment. And so you can have all the capital you want, but until you have a leader like Donald Trump who's moving to cut red tape, to remove regulation, you know, this administration has cut more regulation than any administration in the history of America. And that's why we had the economy, not only the strongest in the world, but the strongest in the history of the world. And so thank God we did, or, you know, no telling where we would be. But to your point about the PPP loans, you know, the small community bank where I lead, you know, 39% of the loans that we did were, 29% of the loans that we did were minority loans. 43% were to women-owned businesses. And so the idea that, you know, this government, this moment in time, we were able to respond because of the leadership of President Trump and this administration, and it made a difference in the lives of people. I know many businesses in Oklahoma that would have closed but for the PPP program, and many of those businesses are starting to open today. And I think it's going to open the eyes of a lot of not just business owners, but many of those workers, a lot of those workers who were not politically active before, who may have had a Democrat leaning, they know who was able to deliver during this time of the pandemic, and it was the Trump administration.
You know, you're absolutely right about that. You know, I get emails all the time from people in underserved communities because they can't get their leadership to take action. Right. And it's very disheartening. So I hope they are paying attention to who's actually trying to help and who's actually trying to hurt.
And Katrina, look, the president has taken a real balanced approach, as you both have said. He has seen this not only as a public health challenge, he's understood that this is also an economic challenge. And he knows that there's economic misery and there's a spike up in the overall misery index if, in fact, we don't get this economy opened up again. And so what he's protecting against is this push to create bigger and bigger government and increase dependency on government and the creation of incentives that work against work. Look, I remember in 2016, in a conversation with the president, we reached a common agreement. He was the then candidate. And that is that America was rapidly becoming a country where earning money didn't entitle you to it, but wanting money did. And he said, we have to turn that on its head, and we have to bring back a respect for the dignity of work. But the only way to do that is to make sure that we create jobs. And the only way you create jobs is to make sure that we have environmental safety or infrastructure and capital. And he's done that. And leaders at the local level who can get on that Trump train will, in fact, serve their people.
Well,
You know, it's been my
contrast
experience.
that,
The president's usually right on that. Go ahead, TW.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and contrast that with what you're hearing from the left. I mean, what we all know is, and what President Trump knew intuitively, even before he ran for office in the private sector solely, what he knew is the best social program in the world is a good paying job. And that works not just in the greater America, but that works for Black America, Hispanic America, whatever hyphenated America you want to call it. A good paying job is what matters. And that's what's going to pull us out of this pandemic health crisis that we're in now. It's not super social programs that hand out money to keep people from working. It's not social programs that disincentivize people from working. It's going to be the private sector that pulls us out of this. We know that, and I'm glad that we have a leader who knows that as well.
Well, yeah, and I think to the point of the election, I mean, Joe Biden is the complete opposite of everything that the president not only has done, but wants to do. And let's just take the pandemic, for example. You know, this coronavirus came from China, and China hid information. And this has really highlighted their predatory trade behavior as well as theft of intellectual property. These are all of the things that President Trump warned about for years, even as a candidate in 2016. But we also know how the Chinese Communist Party puts minorities in so-called re-education camps. And for some reason, Joe Biden seems to be awfully friendly with China. Ken, what do you make of that as a human rights activist?
It's because they both have bought into the big, muscular central government, in our case, federal government model, where, as I said at the beginning of the show, the president has been about creating an opportunity society. That in itself flies in the face of the autocratic communist China regime, who wants to steal our intellectual property, who wants to cheat us on trade deals, who in fact wants to become the superpower, lone superpower in the world. This president has said, not on my watch. That's why he'll win 4 more years, because people understand that he's had the courage to take on this menace.
And with that, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more Black Voices for Trump Real Talk.
Mass incarceration has put hundreds of thousands behind bars for minor offenses. Joe Biden wrote those laws.
Every major crime bill that's come out of this Congress has had the name Joe Biden on that bill. We do everything but hang people for jaywalking in this bill.
Joe Biden's policies destroyed millions of Black lives. Joe Biden may not remember, but we do.
I'm free to hug my family. I'm free to start over. This is the greatest day of my life. My heart is just bursting with gratitude. I want to thank President Donald John Trump. Woo!
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
People are really looking for something. I think you have to go out and really work hard.
You've sort of become like a folk hero.
There are no better builders than we have in New York, and a big percentage of that is Black and minority folks, and I'm very proud of it. I say to the African-American people that have to suffer, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it.
The Black unemployment rate, the lowest in history.
1.3 million jobs, more than 1.3 million jobs added for African Americans. You talk about the First Step Act, thousands of people released from jail, 90% of them being African American.
And I want to thank our incredible president.
Funding for historically Black colleges and universities. Opportunity zones, almost 9,000 of those in marginalized areas. This president has done more for African Americans in a matter of 2 to 3 years than any president in my lifetime.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to Black Voices for Trump, Real Talk Online. I'm Katrina Pierson, back with TW Shannon and Ken Blackwell. I want to take a moment to play this clip by Harris Faulkner and her powerful words yesterday about Joe Biden's comments. And then I want to get your reactions. Let's watch.
I've been fighting against this notion that you're not black enough unless you think a certain way, you vote a certain way, you speak a certain way, you do certain things. My whole life, I grew up military, pretty much neutral along the zone of can we all just get along no matter what we look like. I have biracial daughters, Melissa, you know them. This is more than just a little offensive. It is short-sighted. It is a blind spot for this former vice president. He should have gotten up immediately on whatever venue microphone he had. I would have said it for him immediately right there in the one that he already was in on the Breakfast Club and say, you know what, let me restate that. But, you know, I think this says it better. It is Black Voices for Trump and their statement. I'm just going to read the first couple of sentences. White liberal elitists have continuously dictated which black Americans are allowed to come to the table and have a voice. It is clear now more than ever following these racist and dehumanizing remarks that Joe Biden believes black men and women are incapable of being independent or free-thinking. He truly believes that a 77-year-old white man should dictate how black people should behave. Biden has a history of racial condescension, and today he once again proved that a growing number of black Americans, and I have always known Joe Biden does not deserve our votes. That's Katrina Pierson, Trump 2020 senior advisor. You don't have to be any particular race to know when someone puts you down because you're different.
So guys, you know, it doesn't really matter if you're a Republican, a Democrat, independent, apolitical. It doesn't matter. If you are black, you experience the black experience. And no one, not even Jim Crow Joe Biden, can take that away. So as black men, why don't you take this opportunity to share with the audience a little bit about your black experience? I mean, I know you're no longer black as of yesterday, but I would really like for people to hear, because there are very different worldviews and cultural influences that, you know, we deal with throughout our journey that, you know, elitist white liberals, Joe Biden, don't. Ken, tell us how you've managed to survive without the white liberals making all of your decisions for you.
Look, the families are the incubator of liberty. And so I had the privilege of growing up in a strong family. When my dad came back from World War II, there was a housing shortage. There was still vestiges of segregation in Cincinnati. So we lived the first part of my early childhood in public housing. But my dad worked his way out of public housing and into market housing, but he never owned his own home. But he, in fact, instilled in my brother and I the willingness to work hard and to own our own home, and we were able to do it. I became mayor that was and ran City Hall. That was just about a half mile from the public housing community in which my early childhood took place. But I'll tell you, it was something that most folks don't understand, and that was my dad taught us not only to work hard but to take risks. And so in 1990, I took a second mortgage, my wife and I, now of 52 years, we took a second mortgage out on our home, and we joined a small group of 4 other African Americans, and we bought a radio station. That radio station grew from 1 radio station to 22 radio stations, and we were able to sell those 22 radio stations to Kathy Hughes and Radio 1. But more importantly, we created jobs. We, in fact, provided hope to families and a track to education for other Black folks to educate their kids. So that's my experience, and I don't need Joe Biden to tell me that I'm not Black. You know, I've lived the Black experience, and I'm proud of it. But the Federation of Colored Women's Clubs had this motto: lifting as we climb. And I've always tried to lift as I climb.
You know, I think that's been a big difference in, you know, Black liberals and Black conservatives. And it's quite obvious, particularly if you're younger in the political field trying to find your way, you learn that very quickly. You know, T.W. Harris's comments really struck home with me because I have a Black son. You know, our lives are very different than everybody else's lives. And, you know, a lot of people like to pretend that everything's the same, and it's just simply not. So to hear somebody like Joe Biden strip away our Blackness as if we didn't have the same struggles and we don't have to deal with the same fears that other Black people do, it's so dehumanizing and it's so condescending, and it was so infuriating to me. You know, we all took to Twitter yesterday and made our comments, and so I'm glad that we're having the show today. But being that you were the first Black speaker of the House of the state of Oklahoma, and currently a CEO of a community bank, tell our viewers about your experience of being Black, even though Joe Biden has told you that you aren't, or
Yeah, well,
you ain't.
I'm happy to talk about what it means to be Black in America any day of the week, but I refuse to allow a guy like Joe Biden, who has stood with segregationists for generations and now feels that he, at the height of his liberal privilege, has the opportunity to tell me and define who I am and what I should be. I mean, that I reject, you know, in full. But I will tell you, you know, my experience as an African American, growing up with two wonderful parents. My parents were married over 40 years. My mother just passed away this year. And, you know, I always tell people I didn't receive my conservative values from listening to Joe Biden or going to college or listening to the Hollywood mainstream media. I got them right in the African American Bethlehem Baptist Church, the little ladies there and the men there, where we had strong families. We had people that, you know, believed in the dignity of hard work and knew that, you know, that it's not a government handout that's going to make a difference in your life. That's where I got my conservative values. And so when I ran for office at the age of 28, ran for the Oklahoma legislature and was elected when I was 33, I didn't win because I was African American. I didn't win because of my Native American heritage. I won because I was the candidate that was willing to get up early and stay up later and outwork everybody else. And that's not just a unique in a political sphere. That works across the board in the private sector, in the public sector. And that's really what the African American experience is about. And that's something that I think Beijing Biden should spend some more time learning after he apologizes for the harmful comments that he made.
Yeah, we'll see if the media is going to press for that apology, considering how none of his opponents were able to get him to. And so with that, I'd actually like to get your final comments for our viewers this evening. But before we go there, I really want you to know that we are truly in this fight to continue bringing prosperity and opportunity to Black Americans. And here are some ways that you at home can join the fight and get involved. You can download our brand new Trump 2020 campaign app. It's available on Apple and Android. Sign up at armyfortrump.com to join our grassroots efforts by attending trainings, hosting MAGA meetups, and help with phone banking. And as always, text WOKE to 88022 to join the Black Voices for Trump Coalition. And to keep in touch with the Trump campaign, text Trump to 88022 to stay in touch with us. And now, back to our guests for your final comments. Closing remarks, gentlemen. TW, what message would you like to leave with our audience this evening?
Well, I would just like to say, you know, as we think about what this next election means in terms of the African-American experience and in our community, I think like never before, we have to have a leader who's willing to speak directly to the issues that affect our community. And yes, racism is alive and well, as demonstrated by the comments of Joe Biden. But the reality is the things that are going to make a difference in the community are strong families and job opportunities. And I always know to the bottom of my core that the greater the freedom, the greater the wealth. And we have to have a candidate who's pushing to expand the bounds of freedom, not just for African Americans, not just for Native Americans or Hispanic Americans, but for all Americans. And I'm so grateful that President Trump has laid out an agenda that we've seen those results. Not only, we're not talking about what ifs and hypotheticals now. We're talking about proven results. And as we work our way out of this pandemic that we've been facing, I know that it's the private sector that's going to lead the charge, but we have to have the right leadership, and President Trump is providing that.
Yeah, those are great remarks, TW. Thank you. I'm sure our viewers really appreciate that and your stories that you've shared tonight. And Ken, what are your final thoughts for our viewers this evening?
I grew up again in a family that was organized around 3 books. Those books were the date book, the checkbook, and the good book. The date book told us how we spend our time and with whom we spend it. And the checkbook, no matter how meager our resources, how we spent our resources reflected our values. But the Bible taught us to choose the path of conviction over the path of convenience. Let me just tell you, if you're for religious liberty, you're for Donald Trump. If you're for economic prosperity and opportunity, you're for Donald Trump. And now we come to the big book. How do we organize our time and who do we spend our time with? We need to get our voters out to the polls. That is what matters in November. We have every reason to make the right choice and to give it 110% effort.
I saw the movement stop. Are we done?
Yep.
Okay, good, because they were screaming. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken, and thank you. You've been someone that I've admired for a very long time, one of the trailblazers for people like TW and myself. So thank you both for joining us this evening, and thank you to everyone at home for tuning in tonight. Team Trump Online is on 7 nights a week, so check our online schedule for the next Black Voices for Trump Real Talk Online. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.